a boarding house specifically for the homeless, yet the residents mysteriously disappeared one after another. The courtyard was perpetually shrouded in the stench of decay until the police unearthed 7 bodies buried beneath the garden of the apartment. As the truth gradually emerged, the identity of the murderer was shocking. One cannot truly know a person by their appearance. An outwardly kind old lady turned out to be a serial killer. Even after being arrested, she continued to argue cunningly that her friends and neighbors could vouch for her. In everyone's eyes, she was a gentle and kind-hearted person, dedicated to charity and taking in the homeless. However, the bodies buried beneath the garden made her identity an enigma. Was she a philanthropist who didn't seek anything in return, or a ruthless serial killer? Sacramento, located in the central part of California, USA, saw a massive influx of gold prospectors in 1848 due to the discovery of high-purity gold. In the 1980s, in the Mexican community of Sacramento, there lived a beloved outstanding woman named Dorothea Puente. Dorothea operated a boarding house in Sacramento, catering specifically to the elderly and frail, those addicted to drugs and alcohol, or homeless individuals with mental health issues. Such apartments cooperated with government welfare agencies, which registered the homeless on the streets and sent them to the apartments for care. The welfare agencies sent a certain amount of welfare funds to their places of residence in the form of checks every month, and they used this money to pay for their accommodation and meals. Due to the limited custodial fees received, the environment and hygiene conditions of most custodial apartments were very poor. But when people first entered Dorothea's apartment, they would think they had come to an upscale nursing home. Upon entering, there was a bright and tidy living room, a beautiful lawn in the backyard, and the elderly sat comfortably on benches chatting. The rooms for shelter were all equipped with soft and comfortable bedding. Each room had a television, and there were private bathrooms. Dorothea herself had a meticulous hairstyle with white hair, wore a pair of gold-rimmed glasses, and liked to wear elegant Mexican national costumes. She looked like a kind old lady in her 70s, treating everyone with a friendly demeanor, accepting and taking good care of anyone sent by social workers, regardless of how bad their condition was. Her cooking skills were superb, and the meals in the apartment were comparable to those in a restaurant. Every Wednesday and Thursday, she would take money from her meager profits and distribute traditional Mexican food, chicken rolls, for free in the community. For impoverished children in the community, she would provide clothing and basic learning supplies. She also regularly held free anonymous alcohol cessation meetings in the apartment to help alcoholics get back on track. On November 7, 1988, a social worker from Sacramento, Judy Moyes, reported that one of her service targets was missing. The missing person was Bert Montoya, a 51-year-old former homeless person. Due to mental health issues, he could not clearly state his identity, so he had been living in a shelter. After several detours, Judy found out his true identity and helped him apply for Social Security benefits. In February, Judy found a highly reputed boarding house for him, located at 1426 F Street in Sacramento. It was Dorothea's boarding house, and because the landlord was a kind old lady, many social workers were willing to arrange for the people they helped to live in her home. Since Bert moved in, he gradually became self-sufficient. His mental health improved a lot, and he could communicate with people simply. Judy would visit him regularly, but a few weeks ago, the landlord said Bert had gone on a long vacation and would be back in a few days. Judy did not suspect. After a while, when she was about to visit again, she received a voicemail from someone claiming to be Bert's brother-in-law, saying that Bert was living with them and there was nothing to worry about. However, the attentive Andy found that the name of the person who left the message was not the same as Bert's brother-in-law. Judy asked the landlord for information, and the landlord said Bert had gone to Mexico to visit relatives. This explanation made Judy even more suspicious because Bert had been in the United States for many years and had long lost contact with his relatives, not to mention that he now had mental health issues. In addition, the landlord was evasive, as if hiding something, so she thought something had happened to Bert and quickly called the police. After receiving the report, the police immediately went to the apartment to investigate. The landlord still claimed that he was on vacation, and another tenant of the apartment, John, testified for the landlord. But unexpectedly, just as the police officer was about to leave, John, who had just been confident, secretly handed a note to the police officer which read, "The landlord asked me to lie, but I don't know where Bert went. It seems that this landlord is very problematic." After the police investigation, it was found that the landlord of this apartment was indeed not simple. Dorothea was born in January 1929 in the small town of Redlands, California, in a poor Mexican family. Her parents worked in the cotton fields to make a living, but when night fell, Dorothea's mother would bring strange men back to their residence, exchanging her body for some extra income. When Dorothea was 8 years old, her father died of tuberculosis. A year later, her mother died in a car accident due to alcoholism. After that, Dorothea and her siblings were sent to various children's welfare institutions and foster care organizations. In 1945, 16-year-old Dorothea left the foster care system, left California, and went to Washington to make a living as a prostitute. Soon she met a soldier named Fred McFall, who was 22 years old and had just returned from the Pacific battlefield. Dorothea and Fred got married and had 2 daughters between 1946 and 1948. The eldest daughter was given up for adoption by the couple as soon as she was born, and the younger daughter was sent by Dorothea to live with relatives in Sacramento. In 1948, Dorothea and Fred's marriage broke down. A few months later, Dorothea was arrested for using counterfeit checks to buy women's accessories in Riverside. She was charged with 2 counts of forgery, served 4 months in prison, and was on probation for 1 year. Dorothea, who was still on probation, came to San Francisco to make a living. She abandoned her past identity and changed her name to Taya, claiming to be a Muslim with Egyptian and Israeli ancestry. In 1952, Dorothea married Johnson, a Swedish merchant sailor. Dorothea took advantage of Johnson's frequent voyages to set up a casino at home to make money. With the money from running the casino and Johnson's remittances, Dorothea opened an illegal brothel. In 1960, her brothel was shut down by the police, and Dorothea was sentenced to 90 days in prison. After getting out of prison, Dorothea was an alcoholic, noisy, and behaved abnormally. In 1966, Johnson and Dorothea divorced. In the same year, 37-year-old Dorothea remarried, and her third husband was 17-year-old Roberto Puente. After marriage, Dorothea decided to engage in nursing work. However, since she did not have a nursing license, she could only do the simplest nursing work in nursing homes and welfare organizations, such as giving patients medication and bathing. 16 months later, Roberto and Dorothea separated, and Dorothea claimed that domestic violence was the main reason. However, Dorothea's friends believe that Roberto married Dorothea just to get a green card in the United States, and once his goal was achieved, he left her without hesitation. After Roberto left, the smart Dorothea quickly smelled business opportunities in the nursing industry. She used her savings to buy a building at 2100 F Street in Sacramento and started operating a boarding house. In 1978, Dorothea was convicted for illegally cashing 34 checks from her tenants, with a total amount of more than $4,000. She was sentenced to 5 years of probation and was ordered to pay $4,000 in compensation, as well as a lifetime ban on running a boarding house. Dorothea sold the apartment to pay the fine and started working as a nanny and caregiver, still often stealing from her clients' homes. Esther was a wealthy old lady living alone, one of Dorothea's clients. Although she suffered from chronic heart disease, her condition had always been well controlled. However, soon after, her condition suddenly worsened, and she had to be rushed to the hospital for emergency treatment almost every week. A nurse in the hospital found that as long as Dorothea went to take care of Esther, she would definitely come to the hospital the next day. So, on one of Dorothea's shifts, the doctor went to Esther's home to observe and found that there was nothing wrong with Dorothea's care for Esther. After a period, a doctor from another hospital called Esther's doctor, wanting to discuss her condition with him. It turned out that ever since the doctor from the first hospital observed Dorothea's care for Esther, Dorothea had persuaded Esther to change hospitals for treatment. Both doctors began to suspect that Esther's recurring condition was related to Dorothea. So the doctor conducted multiple toxicological tests on Esther and found that her blood contained a variety of high-dose drugs, but these drugs were not in her prescription but belonged to Dorothea. Thus, the doctor and Esther's family believed that Dorothea, in order to get a high salary and generous tips, deliberately drugged Esther to make her more sick and dependent on her. In addition, Esther's family also found that since Dorothea came to work at Esther's home, many of Esther's valuables have disappeared. However, after calling the police believed that the existing evidence was not enough to arrest Dorothea. In 1981, Dorothea met Ruth and her boyfriend Harold. Ruth admired Dorothea's cooking skills very much, and the two decided to open a restaurant together. Dorothea was responsible for the kitchen and management, while Ruth was responsible for all the startup funds. They set up a joint account at the bank, and Ruth kept injecting funds into it. However, due to Ruth's boyfriend Harold died of cancer, Ruth was very sad, so she moved to Dorothea's rented residence and became her roommate. Ruth's son Bill would often go to Dorothea's place after work to see his mother's condition. With Dorothea's company, Ruth's mood gradually brightened, and it seemed that she had come out of the shadow of her boyfriend's death. But one day, Bill found that his mother was actually drinking. Bill was very strange because Ruth was allergic to alcohol, so she never touched a drop of alcohol. Ruth told him that this was a cocktail specially made for her by Dorothea to soothe her nerves. The next day, when Bill came to visit her, he found Ruth lying in bed, unable to move, and did not speak to him. Dorothea said that Ruth had the flu and she had already taken her to see a doctor. The doctor said it was not a big deal and prescribed her some sedative drugs to let her rest well. Ruth has always been healthy, and Bill did not think much about it and kissed his mother goodbye, but the next morning his mother Ruth passed away. When Bill and other family members arrived, a coroner was also at Dorothea's home. Dorothea told the coroner that she thought Ruth died from taking too many drugs, but she did not know whether it was an accident or Ruth wanted to end her own life. Ruth's family could not accept her sudden death, and Bill requested an autopsy for Ruth. The forensic autopsy determined that Ruth died from an overdose of acetaminophen and codeine. Bill checked Ruth's medical records to see if the doctor had prescribed her these two drugs, but the results surprised him. Since Ruth moved into Dorothea's home, she had never been to the hospital or seen a doctor. It turned out that what Dorothea had previously claimed, that she took Ruth to see the flu, was all a lie. After Ruth died, Dorothea returned her things to Bill. However, what Bill got was only an empty handbag, and Ruth's jewelry, cash, and even clothes were all gone. After Ruth's death, Dorothea met a 73-year-old retired elderly man named Malcolm at a bar. The two started dating, and what was a bit strange for Malcolm was that every night when Dorothea stayed over, he would get drunk, and the next day he would find something missing from his home. Malcolm, who was on alert, only drank half a glass of wine on a date. But then he felt weak in his limbs, lying on the sofa and unable to move, but his consciousness was clear. He saw Dorothea carrying a red suitcase, walking around the room, and putting anything that caught her eye into the suitcase. Finally, she came to Malcolm's side and took off his ring. The next day, after waking up from the drunkenness, Malcolm called the police. In January 1982, the police arrested Dorothea, and during the bail period before the trial, Dorothea bought a plane ticket to Mexico. A few days before boarding, she visited an old friend, Osborne, with wine. Osborne fainted after drinking the cocktail made by Dorothea. When Osborne woke up 12 hours later, he found that his jewelry, cash, credit cards, and checkbooks were all cleaned out. Osborne immediately called the police, and the police quickly caught Dorothea, who was about to flee to Mexico. In June 1982, Dorothea was brought to court. Because the evidence for the cases of Malcolm and Osborne was conclusive, she was sentenced to 5 years in prison. She told her fellow inmates about her legendary experiences as a royal illegitimate child, former actor, ex-girlfriend of a celebrity, and current doctor, and she also had a pen pal, a retired old man from Oregon named Afson. The two frequently corresponded and quickly established a romantic relationship. In 1985, after serving 3 years in prison, Dorothea was paroled. Before being released, she underwent a mental test, which showed that Dorothea might have schizophrenia. On the day of Dorothea's release, her 77-year-old boyfriend Afson drove his red pickup from Oregon to California to welcome her release. On this day, Afson successfully proposed to Dorothea and became her Fia and became her. Afson and Dorothea's life was rich and happy. However, Dorothea was not satisfied with the status quo. She forged a series of medical diplomas and certificates, preparing to continue running a boarding house. Because Dorothea had been married 4 times by this time, her surname had changed 3 times, and the official who reviewed the boarding house did not find that this Dorothea was the one who had committed multiple crimes before. Coupled with forged documents and sweet talk, Dorothea smoothly obtained the business license. In 1985, the boarding house at 1426 F Street began to operate. Afson helped Dorothea run the boarding house, and he kept writing letters to his family, telling about his happy life, but in October 1985, Afson's family in Oregon suddenly lost his news. In November 1985, Dorothea hired a decorator to install wainscoting for her apartment. After the work was completed, Dorothea asked him if she could give him a red second-hand Ford pickup as payment, claiming that the truck originally belonged to her ex-boyfriend, but her ex-boyfriend had abandoned her and went to Los Angeles, so she wanted to sell it as soon as possible. The decorator readily agreed and also made a rectangular wooden box for Dorothea to store books and other items as requested. Later, he was asked to help her move the box to a warehouse. On the way, Dorothea told him that she had changed her mind, thinking it was not cost-effective to rent a warehouse for the box, so Dorothea asked the decorator to throw the box into a landfill by the river. On January 1, 1986, a fisherman found a coffin-shaped box by the river and found a severely decomposed and unrecognizable body of an elderly man inside. Since there were no clues to prove the identity of the body, the case was shelved. After Afson went missing, Dorothea continued to collect his pension and wrote letters to his family, explaining that the reason Afson did not contact them was that he had a heart attack. After more than 2 years, Dorothea's business was getting better and better, life was rich, and she did a lot of charity work, deliberately dressing up to look much older than her actual age, and became a community celebrity. It wasn't until Judy became suspicious and the police investigated Dorothea's background that Detective John called Judy to inform her of the progress of the case and said that he was going to take people to Dorothea's apartment to investigate. When Dorothea saw John and his team, she was very calm and readily agreed to John's request to search the boarding house. John searched the room where Bert had previously lived and found some common tranquilizers and sleeping pills. John was about to leave, and Dorothea let out a long sigh of relief. John said helplessly, "This way I can report to Judy, I can tell her that I have checked every place, but in the end, I found nothing." John first dug up some trash, such as waste paper and cigarette butts in the courtyard, then dug up a pile of clothes that looked like cowhide products, and he continued to dig down, digging a long bone at one end of a spherical shape, and he immediately recognized that this was a human femur. After that, he dug out the entire human skeleton, and that pile of clothes that seemed to be cowhide turned out to be shed human skin. Dorothea was taken back to the police station for questioning, but she had not been arrested at this time. She calmly answered every question, insisting that she had nothing to do with the bodies in the backyard and had no idea about their existence. Then Dorothea was allowed to go home. The next day, the Sacramento Police Department invited 2 forensic and anthropological experts to come and turn the small courtyard upside down. Dorothea silently watched everything from the balcony on the 2nd floor. Then Dorothea asked Detective John if she could go to the coffee shop on the corner for a cup of coffee. Detective John saw that she only had a small bag with her and readily agreed. Then the police dug up another body wrapped in plastic bags and blankets. Dorothea, who had used the excuse of going out for coffee, had already gone far away. Someone saw her get into a taxi. The police found the taxi driver and learned that Dorothea had taken a bus to Los Angeles. The Sacramento police issued a nationwide wanted notice for Dorothea on television and in newspapers. The 7 bodies were sent to the Sacramento City Coroner's office, but the bodies had highly decomposed and all the teeth of the bodies were missing, with only 3 of them having fingerprints extracted. The identities of the bodies were difficult to determine for a while, and it was only known that there were 3 males and 4 females. While the police were looking for the identities of the bodies, they continued to search for Dorothea's criminal evidence in the apartment. They found blue tape in Dorothea's room that was consistent with the tape on the bodies and a large number of prescription sedatives with her name written in the kitchen. On November 15, 1988, Dorothea, who had fled to Los Angeles, still went to a bar in full dress. Soon, she started drinking with a man, inquired about his income, and gave him financial advice. Before leaving, she left her hotel address for the man. On November 16th, the Sacramento police received news that a man who met Dorothea at the bar saw that she was wanted nationwide when he watched TV at home and reported Dorothea's address to the Los Angeles police. Subsequently, after Dorothea was arrested by the Los Angeles police, Chief John rushed to Los Angeles and escorted her back to Sacramento. A few days later, the fingerprint expert invited by the police finally confirmed the identities of 3 of the deceased, 51-year-old Bert, 55-year-old Benjamin, and 64-year-old Dorothy. The forensic doctor scanned the remaining 4 bodies with X-rays, found some pathological characteristics, and compared them with the information in the medical records. In the end, the identities of all the deceased were confirmed, and the remaining 4 were 78-year-old Leona, 78-year-old Betty, 64-year-old Vera, and 62-year-old James. After Dorothea's case was exposed, her Aveson's family in Oregon also contacted the police. They said they had not been able to contact him for more than 3 years and suspected that he had been killed. At this time, the decorator who had previously decorated for Dorothea and made the wooden box went to the police station after learning about the case and detailed what Dorothea had asked him to do and where the wooden box was discarded. Subsequently, the police determined that the body found in the wooden box by the fisherman 3 years ago was Aveson. The decorator identified that the wooden box was the one he made for Dorothea by hand. Moreover, the red Ford pickup that Dorothea gave him as a work fee was also Aveson's. Dorothea's good friend Ruth's son Bill also contacted the prosecutor again, and Ruth's death was determined to be a murder. The prosecutor also merged the case of Ruth with other cases and prepared to prosecute Dorothea for murder. Dorothea was charged with 9 counts of murder, her good friend Ruth, her Aveson, and 7 boarders. It is estimated that she profited at least $100,000 from the murders. In court, the prosecutor presented all the forensic evidence and physical evidence such as checks and tape, and summoned more than 130 witnesses to testify. He said that Dorothea used sleeping pills to make her boarders fall asleep, then used a pillow to suffocate them to death, and then hired people to bury them in the yard. She could continue to enjoy their welfare benefits without having to take care of them. The defense also called many witnesses who were deeply grateful for Dorothea's generosity and care. Many people, including her daughter who was adopted and reunited, said that much of their current successful career is due to Dorothea's help. The defense psychologist believes that Dorothea's abusive childhood experiences and a series of traumas that shaped her life led to her crimes. At the same time, the huge pressure of taking care of the poor and down-and-out boarders also released her evil side. The prosecutor concluded by saying these people are living people and they have the right to live. They have no property, no house, no car. All they have is a little social welfare check in their lives. And she took it all away. The death penalty is the only appropriate punishment. The defense attorney facing the jury said in a sad and low tone, "What we need to determine here today is the value of Dorothea Puente's life. That's the question. Does she have to be killed? Ladies and gentlemen, I think only when you fall and stumble on the road of life, and someone helps you up, gives you comfort, gives you love, and points the way for you, Can you truly understand why so many people testified and asked for Dorothea's life to be spared? Then you will understand why these people think Dorothea's life is worth saving. This is a human quality worth preserving. This is the flame of humanity, which is the reason for giving Dorothea life imprisonment without parole. During the deliberation of the jury, there was an 11-1 deadlock on the conviction of the 9 charges. One of the jurors believed that the existing evidence could not prove that Dorothea committed murder, and Dorothea's statement was reasonable. After more than a month of negotiation, the jury finally agreed to convict her of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of second-degree murder. She was imprisoned in a women's prison in Central California, and throughout her life, she always insisted that she was innocent, insisting that all her boarders died of natural causes. In 2011, Dorothea passed away in prison.